They banned my kids from riding their bikes on the sidewalk, so I shut off every streetlight in the neighborhood, and I left them in the dark long enough to remember what it feels like to lose control. Now, before you decide I'm some kind of petty lunatic, you should know, this didn't start with me. It started with a clipboard, a rulebook, and a man who thought authority mattered more than common sense. It was one of those slow, golden evenings, the kind you don't really think about while it's happening, but later realize it was perfect. The air was warm, not humid yet, just enough breeze to keep the bugs away, and the sun was hanging low behind the rows of identical beige houses like it always does in subdivisions built too fast and named too optimistically. Ours was called Maple Ridge Estates, which was funny because there wasn't a single maple tree in sight, just young saplings and HOA-approved landscaping that all looked like it came out of the same catalog. I was out front with my twins, Ethan and Lily, both 8 years old, both finally brave enough to ditch the training wheels after weeks of wobbling in the driveway. That day felt like a milestone. Ethan had this determined little jaw clench he gets when he's focused, and Lily kept laughing every time she almost tipped over, like falling was part of the fun. I remember leaning against the mailbox thinking, this is it. This is what all those long work hours are for. Moments like this. And then, like clockwork, the peace got interrupted. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. You can tell a lot about a person just by how they walk up to you. This was brisk, deliberate, just a little too stiff, like someone who practices authority in the mirror. When I finally looked, there he was, Calvin Pierce, treasurer of the HOA, mid-50s, always dressed like he might accidentally attend a board meeting at any moment. Button-down shirt tucked into khakis, pen clipped in the pocket, and of course, the clipboard. Evening, he said, not really smiling, more like showing teeth out of habit than friendliness. I nodded, already bracing myself. Hey, Calvin. He didn't waste time. He never does. I'm going to need you to have your children stop riding their bicycles on the sidewalk. Ethan slowed down, one foot dragging to keep balance, eyes flicking between me and this stranger who had just inserted himself into his moment. Lily came to a full stop, confused more than anything. What? She asked, like maybe she misheard him. Calvin glanced down at his clipboard like it was scripture. Section 12B of the Maple Ridge Community Guidelines. Sidewalks are designated for pedestrian use only. Wheeled recreational devices pose a liability risk and can contribute to surface degradation. I blinked at him, trying to decide if this was a joke that hadn't landed yet. They're kids, I said, gesturing toward them. They're learning to ride bikes. These are privately maintained walkways, he replied, tone flat, rehearsed. Maintenance is funded by resident dues. Damage, even minor, becomes a shared cost. Ethan looked down at his front tire like it had personally offended someone. Lily just whispered, but we're not hurting anything. And that right there, that quiet little sentence, that's what stuck with me more than anything else. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice level. Calvin, the nearest public park is almost 2 miles away. You want them riding out there on the main road. That would be an appropriate alternative, he said, without hesitation. Or your driveway. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know what else to do. My driveway is barely 20 feet long. He shrugged slightly. The board voted unanimously. We've received multiple complaints. Tire marks, near collisions with pedestrians, general safety concerns. From who? I asked. He didn't answer that. Instead, he pulled out a laminated sheet and held it up like a badge. The policy is clear. I looked at my kids. The excitement was gone, replaced by that quiet, sinking disappointment that kids don't know how to hide yet. Ethan kicked at the ground. Lily rested her bike against her leg, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch it anymore. And in that moment, I could have pushed back harder, argued, made a scene, but I didn't. Not right there. Not in front of them. I exhaled slowly. All right, I said, tight but controlled. We'll head inside. Calvin gave a single nod, like he'd just resolved something important, then turned and walked away, already checking something off on his clipboard. We went back into the garage. I left the door open and turned on the overhead lights so they'd have space to ride in circles, but it wasn't the same. You could feel it. The laughter was gone, replaced by forced smiles and quiet pedaling. After a few minutes, Ethan just stopped and said, "This is boring." Lily didn't even argue. That night, after they went to bed, I sat out back with a beer, staring at the rows of streetlights lining the neighborhood. They'd upgraded those lights a few years ago, switched everything over to LED. Bright, efficient, modern, safer, they said. And that's when I remembered something Calvin probably hoped I'd forgotten. The entire lighting system for Maple Ridge ran through a control box installed in my backyard shed. Not rented space. Not compensated. They'd asked me 3 years ago, said my property was centrally located, ideal for distribution. I'd agreed without thinking twice. Figured it was a neighborly thing to do. Make the community a little better, a little safer. I took another sip of my beer, watching one of the lights flicker faintly before settling. Funny how safety only seems to matter when it benefits the right people. I sat there a long time that night, longer than I meant to, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood, thinking about rules and fairness and the difference between the two. And somewhere along the way, a thought started forming, slow and steady, like a switch being flipped in my head. If they wanted to play by the rules, then maybe it was time I reminded them exactly how those rules worked. I didn't do anything the next day, and that's important, because people always assume these kinds of things come from a burst of anger, like you just snap and act without thinking, but that's not what this was. This was quiet, measured. I went to work, answered emails, sat through a meeting that could have been a memo, came home, made dinner, helped Ethan with his math homework while Lily drew these little comic strips about a superhero cat that somehow always saved the day by doing absolutely nothing. And all the while that thought just sat in the back of my head, steady as a heartbeat. After dinner, the kids asked if they could ride again. Not outside, not even hopeful, just in the garage, I guess. And something about the way they said it, like they were already adjusting their expectations downward, that did more than Calvin ever could have with his clipboard and laminated rules. Give me a minute, I said. I stepped outside, walked around the side of the house, past the fence, to the little shed tucked near the back corner of the yard. It wasn't anything special, just one of those prefab units you pick up from a hardware store. But inside, that was a different story. Mounted against the back wall was a gray metal control panel, about 4 feet tall, with warning labels, conduit lines running in and out, and a single main breaker labeled in block letters. Community lighting system. I stood there for a second, just looking at it, listening to the faint electrical hum, and I remember thinking, this is either incredibly stupid or exactly what needs to happen. There's a moment, right before you cross a line, where your brain gives you one last chance to walk away. Mine did. It ran through all the sensible arguments. Don't escalate. It's not worth it. Be the bigger person. But then it also replayed Lily's voice. We're not hurting anything. And suddenly being the bigger person felt a lot like being the quieter one. The one who just accepts whatever gets handed down. I reached out, wrapped my hand around the breaker, and paused, just long enough to know I was choosing this. Then I flipped it. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way you'd expect. No sparks, no loud noise, just a solid, mechanical click, and then silence. But out beyond my yard, past the fences and driveways and neatly trimmed lawns, one by one, the streetlights went out. Like a wave moving through the neighborhood. Light gone. Light gone. Light gone. I stepped back outside and looked down the street. Dark. Not pitch black. Not yet. There was still some leftover glow from the sky, but it was different. Noticeably different. The kind of dark that makes you slow down without realizing it. I went back into the garage. All right, I said, forcing a casual tone. Let's try something. We wheeled the bikes out to the driveway. No streetlights, no glare, just the soft wash of porch lights and fading daylight. Ethan hesitated at first, then pushed off, a little wobbly, then steadier. Lily followed, laughing again, that same sound from the night before finally coming back. And just like that, it felt normal again. Day 2, things got interesting. People weren't used to the dark. You don't think about how much you rely on streetlights until they're gone. I saw neighbors walking their dogs with phone flashlights, little beams bouncing along the sidewalk. Someone down the block had set up temporary floodlights in their yard, harsh white glare spilling into the street like a bad stage setup. There was more noise, too. Car doors slamming harder, voices carrying farther, like everyone was just a little more on edge. That afternoon, Mrs. Delgado from across the street knocked on my door. She's in her 70s, sharp as a tack, doesn't miss much. You notice the lights? She asked, arms crossed. Yeah, I said. Weird, right? She squinted at me, not quite suspicious, but close. Power company says it's not them. Huh. She held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded slowly. Well, whoever fixes it better do it soon. I almost twisted my ankle last night. I'm sure they're working on it, I said. She left, but not before giving me that look, the one that says she's filing something away for later. That evening, the kids rode again. Longer this time. More confident. Ethan even managed a straight stretch without wobbling, arms stiff but steady, like he couldn't quite believe he was doing it. Lily tried to copy him and nearly ran into the mailbox, which sent both of them into hysterics. And I'll be honest, watching that, hearing them laugh like that, it felt worth it. Day 3, Calvin called. I saw his name pop up on my phone and just let it ring for a second before answering. Hey, Calvin. His voice was tight, controlled, but you could hear the strain underneath. We're experiencing an issue with the community lighting system. Yeah, I noticed the lights are out. The power company has confirmed it's not a supply issue. We believe it may be related to the control unit. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Ethan and Lily through the window as they circled the driveway. That sounds technical. There's a control box on your property, he said, a little sharper now. We'll need access to inspect it. There it was. I'm not sure that's a good idea, I replied. A pause. Excuse me. I mean, it's electrical equipment, right? High voltage. Liability risk. I wouldn't want anyone getting hurt. He exhaled, slow and deliberate. Our contractor is licensed. I'm sure he is, I said. But without proper permits and inspection clearance? That feels unsafe. Another pause, longer this time. Are you refusing access? He asked. I'm saying I'd be more comfortable if everything was handled by the book, I replied, echoing his own tone from the day before just enough for it to land. When he spoke again, the politeness was thinner. We'll follow up. Sounds good. I hung up and set the phone down. That night, the neighborhood got darker, not just physically, but in mood. People were frustrated now. Conversations lingered on sidewalks. Someone posted in the community group about unacceptable conditions. Another person mentioned safety concerns for children, which I found interesting, given the circumstances. Day 5, the first real incident happened. I didn't see it, but I heard it, that dull, unmistakable crunch of metal hitting something it shouldn't. When I stepped outside, a guy from 2 houses down was standing behind his SUV, staring at his neighbor's mailbox, now leaning at an angle like it had given up on life. Couldn't see a damn thing, he muttered when he noticed me. Yeah, I said. It's pretty dark. He shook his head. This is ridiculous. Someone needs to fix this. I nodded slowly. Someone probably will. By day 6, the HOA had hired an electrical contractor. I saw the truck parked outside, logo on the side, 2 guys in work boots walking the perimeter, tracing lines, checking connections. It didn't take them long to figure it out. Of course it didn't. The system wasn't broken. It was off. That afternoon, there was a knock on my door. Not Calvin this time. One of the contractors. Afternoon, he said. We traced the issue to the control panel in your shed. Need to take a look. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping it casual. Do you have the inspection permit? He blinked. The what? The city permit for electrical access and inspection, I said. High voltage system, right? Can't be too careful. He glanced back toward the street, then back at me. Ma'am, this is a standard service call. I understand, I said. But without proper authorization, I can't let anyone access potentially hazardous equipment on my property. He stared at me for a second, then let out a short breath, somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. All right, I'll relay that. Appreciate it. He walked off, shaking his head slightly, like he'd just stepped into a situation he didn't want any part of. That evening, the neighborhood felt tense. Not loud, not chaotic, just this low-level hum of frustration. Porch lights stayed on longer. Conversations were shorter. People were waiting. And I knew it wouldn't be much longer before Calvin showed up again. But this time, he wouldn't be bringing a clipboard. By day 7, the knock came exactly when I expected it. Not early, not late. Right in that in-between hour when people are home from work, but haven't quite settled in yet. When the air still holds onto the heat of the day, and everything feels a little suspended. I opened the door, and there they were. Not just Calvin this time, but the whole board. 5 of them, standing in a loose line on my porch like they'd rehearsed it, except the confidence from a few days ago was gone. No clipboards. No laminated sheets. just tired faces and a kind of quiet urgency they couldn't quite hide. Calvin stepped forward first, but even he seemed smaller somehow. Same shirt, same posture, just less certainty behind it. "Evening," he said. "Evening," I replied, leaning casually against the doorframe. For a second, nobody spoke. You could hear kids playing somewhere down the block, the faint sound of a basketball hitting pavement, a dog barking in the distance, and above all of it, that noticeable absence of streetlight hum. You don't realize how much that background noise fills a neighborhood until it's gone. "We need to talk," he said finally. I nodded toward the driveway. Sure. Ethan and Lily were out there. Of course, they'd gotten used to this new routine, riding in the open dusk, weaving in wide circles, a little braver each night. Ethan had started trying to lift his front wheel, just a few inches, nothing impressive yet, but enough to make him feel like he was unlocking some secret level of growing up. Lily was chasing him, laughing, calling it cheating. The board watched them for a second, and I could see it land. Not fully, not like some big emotional revelation, but enough to register. The board president, a woman named Karen Holt, stepped forward. She was always the reasonable one in meetings, the kind of person who tries to smooth things over before they turn into problems. Her voice, when she spoke, was careful. "We may have been too restrictive with the bicycle policy." I didn't say anything, just waited. She continued, "We've reviewed the complaints, the actual risk assessments, and there's no substantial evidence that children riding bicycles on the sidewalks presents a meaningful liability issue." Calvin shifted slightly beside her, jaw tightening, but he didn't interrupt. Karen held out a folder. "We're formally rescinding Section 12B, effective immediately. Bicycles, scooters, all non-motorized recreational use, permitted on community walkways." Behind her, one of the other board members chimed in, a little too quickly, like he was trying to get ahead of something. "We're also planning to install children at play signage throughout the neighborhood. Increase awareness, reduce misunderstandings." I glanced at the folder, but didn't take it yet. "And?" I asked. That hung there for a second, because we both knew this wasn't just about bikes anymore. Karen hesitated, then nodded slightly toward Calvin. He exhaled, slow, like he was swallowing something bitter. "We'd like to establish a formal agreement regarding the equipment on your property." "Formal," I repeated. "Yes," he said. "Monthly compensation, $150, retroactive to the beginning of this month." I tilted my head slightly. For my inconvenience? There it was, just a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew exactly what I was doing, and more importantly, why. "Yes," he said. Silence again, but a different kind this time. Not tense, settled. I finally reached out and took the folder, flipping it open just enough to see the revised language, the signatures already in place. They'd come prepared, not to argue, to close this. Behind me, Lily's voice cut through the moment. "Dad, watch this." I turned just in time to see her push off, wobble, then straighten out, riding clean for a good 10 feet without a single correction. She looked over at me, eyes wide, like she couldn't believe it. "Did you see that?" I smiled, genuine this time. "Yeah, I saw it." Ethan rolled up beside her, trying to act unimpressed. "I can do longer." "Cannot." "Can too." Their voices overlapped, easy, normal, exactly how it should have been from the start. I looked back at the board. "All right," I said. "That sounds fair." You could feel the shift immediately. Shoulders dropping, tension easing, like they'd all been holding their breath for the same answer. Karen nodded. "We appreciate your cooperation." Calvin didn't say anything. He just gave a short, tight nod, the kind you give when you're agreeing to something you don't like but can't argue with. They turned to leave, footsteps quiet against the pavement, and for a moment, I just stood there, watching them go, not feeling victorious exactly, not like I'd won something, but more like balance had been restored. Like something that tipped too far one way had finally come back to center. That night, after dinner, after the kids were in bed, I walked back out to the shed. Same path as before. Same quiet. Same faint hum waiting behind that metal panel. I opened it up, looked at the breaker. That same simple switch that had turned an entire neighborhood upside down. Funny thing about control, it's rarely about force. Most of the time, it's about knowing where the leverage is and when to use it. I rested my hand on the breaker for a second, not hesitating this time, just acknowledging it. Then I flipped it back on. Click. Out on the street, the lights came back one by one, just like before, but in reverse. dark to light, shadow to clarity, the whole neighborhood waking up in a soft, collective glow. And even from where I stood, you could hear it. Not actual words, not anything clear, just this subtle shift in sound, like people exhaling all at once, tension draining out of the air. The next morning, everything looked the same, but it felt different. Kids were out earlier than usual. Not just mine. Scooters, bikes, chalk drawings spreading across sidewalks that, apparently, were no longer so fragile after all. Someone had already put up one of those bright yellow children at play signs at the corner. It leaned a little crooked, like it had been installed in a hurry. Mrs. Delgado waved at me from across the street. "Lights are back," she called out. "Yeah," I said. "Looks like they fixed it." She studied me for a second, that same sharp look as before. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Not big, not obvious, just enough." "Good," she said, and went back to watering her plants. Ethan and Lily rode past me, faster now, more confident, weaving around each other like they'd been doing it for years. And just like that, life moved on. But here's the thing I keep coming back to, because it's easy to turn this into a clean little story about standing up for yourself, about winning against some overbearing HOA, about justice or whatever word people like to use when things work out neatly. It wasn't that simple. Because yeah, I made my point. I got the rule changed. My kids got their sidewalk back. But I also left an entire neighborhood in the dark for a week. People got hurt. Not seriously, but enough. Someone's property got damaged. People felt unsafe in their own homes, and I knew exactly why it was happening. So where's the line? At what point does pushing back become crossing over? I still don't have a clean answer for that. All I know is, sometimes the only way to make people understand the impact of their decisions is to let them feel it. So I'll ask you this. If you were in my place, would you have let it go? Kept the bikes in the garage, followed the rules, waited for someone else to maybe fix it someday? Or would you have flipped the switch and made them come to you? Let me know what you think, because I'm genuinely curious where that line is for you.